And it's Friday, Tim. How are you?
I am doing well, especially for a Friday. And you?
The same. I'm loving our weather, how it's kind of changing and it's finally becoming summer. This is a late summer for us here in good old New
Oh,
Mexico, but it's getting nice. It's getting very nice.
it's the perfect New Mexico because during the day it's almost summerly and at night it cools off and gives us a little bit of rain. You cannot ask for anything more.
It's beautiful. I was I was just looking over the show flow, and I want to make sure I have this right before we get started. Our intent today for our audience is to focus on a team charter, not a project charter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Good, because a lot of times people hear charter and they think project charter, and then we're off on the wrong footing. So for our audience perspective, and also to keep us in line, we're gonna focus our discussion on team charter. And I have a confession to make, Tim. In 35, 40 years of managing projects, even as a team lead, as a project manager, as a vice president of a major company, I can honestly say that I have never, on a single project, developed a team charter.
Hmm.
So therefore, I don't know if that disqualifies me from this discussion, but I will say this. I will say this. On one of my projects, we tried something new and different, and I think this worked very well. And it probably had the beginnings or makings of a project charter. And that is when we had awarded the contract to a major IT firm as our solution provider. We huddled as a user team. I was doing some work with the end user with a large organization that had contracted for IT services. We
Mhm.
came together as an IT team and we took a whole day just to do some icebreaker activities, to get to know each other, to kind of feel out each other in terms of how we would work together. We didn't formalize it, but I think that was a pretty good start, don't you?
Oh, yes, yes. In fact, let me add to that. Um, about 10 years ago, when I was a third of the way into my teaching experience, one of my students, and I've had this question a lot, said, Tim, this is an incredible amount of documents. Do we really need this? And I took that question to heart. And I said, what if documents are like communication? What if documents are both oral and written? And if documents are all both formal and informal, and we just apply the formality and the documentation as appropriate or necessary. And once I did that, my students said, oh, yeah, I do this all the time. I set aside a collection of information, whether it's in a slide at the kickoff, or I have a conversation in an email. Here's how we're going to work together. And that actually works as a team charter.
Yeah, I've excuse me, I've been in situations where similar to that, this part that I just described, where we came together on a team building function and really got to know each other before we kicked off as a team. One of the things that we did come out of that was we had developed sort of a, I don't want to I don't want to formalize it too much, but let's say it was a mission or a value statement, probably some of each. And it was just two or three sentences. We put it up on great big poster board and we put it in our major meeting room. And it was just a constant reminder of how we would work together, what our mission was, what our values as a team were. And it was just there. It was always there. We never got used to it. We never got complacent. And it was nice. Every once in a while, someone might get out of line and we just point. And it seemed to work. And again, I really wish we had developed more of those for more of my projects, but it seemed to really work.
You know, it's hard to point without a smug smile when you do those things, and it is so satisfying. It may not be the best thing to do, but it's certainly personally satisfying when you're able to say, "That's great. That's
Well,
great."
especially if it's taken in the vein of keeping the team together. If it's not done in a a negative way. I think it's a fun way to
Right.
kind of remind people. Yeah.
Creates camaraderie, a little bit of humorous environment. Perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
And it serves the purpose of the team chart.
So let me ask you this, because I did kind of start this off making sure that our audience knew we were talking team charter, not project charter. I suspect many of the people in our audience could rattle off all of the components of a project charter. But can you help us through a definition of sorts to kind of help us understand as an audience, and for you and I to have common ground to understand what is a team charter?
There are two pieces. And again, this is straight from reference. Number one, like you said, it's the agreements we have in place that say, here's how we're going to play well together. Here's how we're going to be able to operate as a team. And it has values in it. It has ground rules in it, which are the discipline, which is the structure and the boundaries for wrong and right behavior, the morals. It also looks at establishing a culture. How are we going to treat each other, and what is the reason for this group getting together? So those poster boards up there, that's your team charter.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And you mentioned ground rules. So the way I heard you, team charter is the kind of umbrella of all of those pieces, and ground rules is kind of like the major piece of that charter.
Correct. And there's one other piece.
Okay.
The team charter as a tool enforces commitment. That's the beautiful thing. If you can actually get consensus on the team charter, that's when you can smugly look up and point to the wall and say, this is what we agreed, guys.
Well, and the other thing that I'm seeing from this little discussion of definition is I'm seeing that we can also use that to inform other work groups that we come in contact with as part of our team, maybe even our stakeholders who kind of wonder what it is that we're doing. So our team charter that focuses us on our mission is also a good way to communicate out as to what it is that we're doing and how we should be looked at by them.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes. Oh, indeed. Yeah. I'll tell you in a few minutes why I'm smiling, because you're reminding me of a certain story too.
Well, do tell.
Okay. So I developed two services for my consulting organization. I actually developed one service, and then a second service I collaborated on. Well, actually three I developed. Yeah. The one I collaborated on was going into a corporation, assessing that corporation's readiness for data centers, and then helping them with a business and financial strategy for integrating data centers into their operations. Okay. Now, we'd never done this before. And so we pulled together what we thought were skills. And we said, we're going to have to operate as a team like never before. So not only did we have engineers, but we also had business analysts and financial analysts. And we pulled people in from the client's corporation too, 2 or 3 finance experts on their side and that kind of thing. And it took us about 7.5 months to put together a plan. Okay. And this was incredible. And everybody knew, because of the way we worked, we were different. And we were like the team for a couple years because of the way we created our culture and our team, and we were able to pull something like this off.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I can also see where a team charter being formal, I think you mentioned earlier, also parts of an informal agreement amongst us as a team. I can also see where that intersects with the project charter itself. So the project charter has this overall view of how the project is to be run and to what the overall mission and goals of the project are. But within that, the team comes together and agrees on how they will achieve their part of those project goals.
Yes, 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 yes. And that's the secret, okay? And Agile talks this really well. I would love traditional or predictive project life cycles to actually say the same thing. The more you get the team together to actually participate in the decision making and the voting and the creating of the charter, the more ownership they have and the more commitment they have to the charter itself, whether it's the project charter or the team charter or whatever.
Well, I cannot see, I mean, from having run a lot of teams, I cannot ever see a team coming together under the auspices of a team charter if they haven't participated in developing that charter. It just, I mean, just another one of those management things thrust upon them, right?
Yes.
So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Bring the whole team in as to how they will discuss and agree upon how they will work together.
Yeah, and you're right. Historically, a lot of the pushback for predictive projects against predictive project lifecycle has been the team are a bunch of mature professional individuals. Why aren't they helping here? And yeah, I think just like you, the more involved and engaged they are, the better it's going to be.
You had mentioned, we talked a little bit as part of the team charter being the ground rules, probably the biggest part of the team charter being the ground rules. And I remember several discussions we've had in past podcasts where one of the things you have often told is that somewhere we have to agree on how we argue. Would that be one of the ground rules, do you think?
Oh, yeah. See, I like to call this how we are going to play well together. And arguing is how we're going to play well together, how we're going to follow the rules in argument, how we're going to respect each other through the argument, and how we're going to come out the other side of the argument and work better because of it. Think about this. I pose this to my students all the time. Number one, whenever we're going to get married, don't whoever's marrying us say it would be really good for you to go through some pre-marriage counseling and talk about how you're going to argue and how you're going to get through the rough patches. One of the things I've always thought, and I would not try this unless you are really, really comfortable with risk. And I've done it a couple times in an interview. Whenever somebody asks me, do you have any questions for us? I love to pull this question out. Let's assume that you hire me. I'm going to be with you for a long time. How do you argue? How do you see me and you coming up with things that we don't agree eye to eye, working through that and coming out the other side? That scares a lot of interviewers, but it tells so much about the environment.
But on the other hand, if I was the recipient of that question from you, I'd be thinking, now here's a guy who's realistic, because you know that when we're together for a month, 2 months, 6 months, or in some of my projects, 6 years, you know there's going to be conflict. You can't have a family situation, which is what a team is. We're just one big family going towards a single goal. And there's no such thing as a family that ever gets out of life without conflict. We can never get out of projects without conflict. So I think if you asked me that question and I were your customer, I'd say, good on you, and let's talk about that, because I know that there will be times that we don't like each other.
Yes, yes. And we're both optimistic because we're confident in our abilities to manage conflict. We're confident that argument is not bigger than the success of the project. And we're willing to go through this, and we're willing to work through the results of the outcome. That's the beautiful thing about this question, but it takes so many people away from what they think an interview is about. But interviews are just that. They are an initial investigation of a relationship. And so is a team charter.
Well, and the other thing that I see from a team charter, we still have to protect the career goals or the aspirations of the individual. So I think there's ways, this is me speaking now, I'm sure this will happen, but I'm sure there are ways to develop a charter such that we work within the confines of the project charter itself. I mean, we have to meet that goal. But secondly, we meet the team goal. But thirdly, we also take care of each individual's aspirational goals. I think there has to be that part built into it as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's the motivation. That's the purpose. If you do build that formally into the charter, you go on record of saying that you personally, I recognize you as an individual, and your success is tied directly to the project success, which you cannot find any greater motivation for a person than that.
Which begs the question, then why would a project manager or team lead ever develop a team charter without the team in the room?
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
And not only that, but talk about these things. Let's list a few other things that are common. If you open the book, you know, what's in a team charter. They talk about ground rules. What do you think a ground rule is? Just in natural language.
Well, the one that we just talked about, it's just sort of rules to live, how we treat each other, how we will work together and treat each other and look after each other, how we'll have each other's backs, because there will be times when we have to have each other's backs. I think that some of the ground rules, for example, we just went through one in a fairly detailed discussion, and that was the whole idea of how we'll argue, how we're going to handle conflict. I think another one is, for example, I was alluding to it with the aspirational goals, and I've had this on teams, is how we will help each other meet the team's goals. For example,
that's brilliant.
I've had superstars who, let's say we're in delivering mode now. We have people going through and developing their particular modules. I've had superstars who can go through and develop modules well ahead of schedule. Because after all, you're not developing a schedule per person, you're developing a schedule based on good predictive averages. But then you have some perhaps people who aren't quite as knowledgeable or experienced, who may be slower. Then I think one of the rules of engagement or ground rules could be that person who has motored on ahead and is well ahead of schedule and his modules are working can stop and go and assist the person who is falling behind so that they can catch up as well and maybe learn a few things from that person. I think that would be a ground rule that I would insist upon if I were a lead.
We all cross the finish line together. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I think about this a lot, not only from what your perspective is, but you have one person with one idea, and they may be great and they may be a superstar. But if you never evaluate their ideas against anybody else's ideas, how do you know that's the best idea for this project? And that's what I've always concerned myself with. That's why everybody in the room has to speak up. I know you're in alignment with that as well.
So one of your ground rules then for meetings, team meetings, would be that everybody has to speak up. We don't want any wallflowers in our meetings.
Right. Everybody speaks, everybody votes, and we are going to attain consensus. Those are some ground rules. Those are the norms that I have, the normal behavior that defines the group.
I went through something like this with a team about a year ago. It happened not to be IT of all things, but guess what? These concepts work in other situations. But one of the things I got across to my team was what you were just talking about, and that was with consensus. And the thing that I had to get across, that I personally tried to get across and was eventually successful, was consensus does not mean unanimity.
Right.
So that could be a ground rule right there. We come to a consensus. Sometimes you disagree, but even if you disagree, young man or young woman, you need to go along with the team that has agreed that this should be the way we go.
Yeah, and I've used this myself successfully. Can I get you on record not to agree with the decision, but to support the group in going in this direction. And we'll
Yes.
celebrate if you're right.
You said that much better than I did, but that's
Yeah,
exactly right.
this is,
Sometimes I don't agree, but I need to support the team.
yes, 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 yes. And this, like you said, this is not just projects, this is not just business. We've been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years, right? This is the way groups survive and thrive. It's not through having superstars, although superstars are great. It's by everybody pulling together.
Yeah, exactly. I I was thinking that another ground rule could be in terms of even some of how we handle meetings. And this may intersect actually with the project charter. Project charter may be at a larger level where we deal with meetings of dealing with our clients and status reporting, but within the team, we have similar requirements, status reporting with the team, meetings for decision-making items, and just those sorts of things. So again, we could borrow from the project charter or maybe enhance the project charter with communication goals or meeting goals within the team.
Right, right. And it connects the dots a lot of times. The team charter connects the dots. For instance, like what you were saying, it's like, here's how we're going to have our meetings together. And here's why we're going to have the meetings. This project is critical and it's very technically complex. And so we cannot miss a detail. So we need to be very detailed oriented in our communication. And we also need to respect each other.
Yes.
We need to treat each other the way we treat the information. And that way we'll be able to do this project very well.
The whole idea of professional courtesy, I think, is part of what those ground rules has to be part of those ground rules.
Oh yeah. Oh
Let,
yeah.
let me pose something to you, because this comes directly from my experience and how I had to solve a situation using ground rules. I am an early morning riser, and I love to be, before the pandemic, when we used to get together in teams in the office, I love to be there at 7 a.m. or earlier. Often my client is there, so I can do some pre-planning for the day or whatever. But a lot of my developers, or even some of my analysts on my team, didn't like to come in until 9-ish, 10-ish. and then when I would leave at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, they'd still be there till 9 or 10 at night.
Right.
Now, what would happen is there was far less time to intersect as a team because we all were all on our own schedules. Have any ideas how to put in some ground? I'll share mine in a minute, but do you have any ideas how you would present ground rules in those situations?
Yeah, I would say you do your best work when you like to do your work. And I understand that totally. And if you want to come in and do your work and go home at the rate you want to, let's figure out, number one, how we can share information so that the project is not impacted on it. And let's evaluate this every 2 to 4 weeks and see if we can improve on this. And if we can actually continue this and make improvements in this model, I'm great with it.
Yeah.
But if we need to have a more equal start and end time where we spend more time together, let's negotiate that, and we'll make the best decision together.
Yeah, which is very similar to what we ended up doing. And this wasn't just one project. This is often, because some of my younger charges love to come in late, but they also love to work late. So what we would do is we would establish core hours. And we didn't care what it took to get your job done, but in these core hours, we needed to come together as a team because there's a lot of information sharing. There are needs for meetings. There are needs for client intersection or interaction. There are those things. So in those core hours, let's say, I'm guessing, let's say 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Everyone is in the office. And in my case, it was often challenged also because one of the things we insisted that our traveling IT professionals did was to spend an extra day at home, either the Monday or the Friday or whatever. So our core hours would be reduced again based on people's travel schedule. But ground rules came in handy, and we all adhered to those, and it worked.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, I this inspires me. I like your idea of core hours, and then having the flexibility around that core. It meets in the middle, which may not be totally satisfying, but at the same time, it gives you a little bit of room to optimize.
Well, it did, and especially for traveling people, allowed them to do dentist appointments and things like that. When, on the Fridays or the Mondays, they could schedule those ahead of time and not worry about what's happening in the project.
There you go.
The other thing we did as part of that, and you may have had experience with this as well, is we pretty much put in something in our, again, this wasn't formalized, but it was informal. We put in something that said you have to be responsive to emails. We can't let an email sit for 24 hours. Now, it doesn't mean you're checking every 5 minutes, but there is a need, and part of our ground rules as a team is you have to be responsive. You have to be, and it's not just a yes, no answer. It has to be well thought out. Think about what the person's asking for and present those ideas to them, but be responsive.
Right. Communication
Yes.
is critical in maintaining the team, and also managing conflict and managing issues, how we are going to function. And again, if you can talk about this in an open way that people don't think that they're being threatened or held against the wall, you can be quite innovative and still, make sure people are comfortable and feel great in their work, as well as meet the needs of the project.
Yeah, you just hit a nerve with me, not a bad nerve, a good nerve with me, because I've often also been hired by client organizations to help their teams organize and work well with an IT organization. And I remember a couple of times when it was major projects. I mean, huge projects where we'd end up with 50 or 60 people from the client organization coming in as part of the team. And even before the IT team got on site, there was already this feeling of being intimidated, because these IT people, they knew them as very intelligent, very aggressive, they worked long hours, and my client team felt, what are they going to do to me? Are they going to make me look stupid because they ask questions that I don't know about? Are they going to make me think that I'm below average because I don't understand IT? So a lot of what I did as part of what we just talked about, making them feel comfortable, even before IT got there, was I played the part, because I came from that era. I played the part of the IT person and how I would come across to them and how they needed to come across to me. Amazing thing happened when the IT team showed up. There was an immediate synergy, and there was an immediate meeting of the minds where nobody felt intimidated, nobody felt superior. But just taking that time to create this informal team charter and what to expect paid dividends for the rest of the project.
This may be a little bit of a rabbit hole, but Merv, this is really critical to understand, because this is so common, whether you're working as a consultant or you're inside a support organization and working with another organization, or maybe you're the intersection between the two organizations. If you weren't there, how would you facilitate that early exchange without being the voice of the IT customer?
You mean without being that intermediary?
Right.
Well, and that, you just put your finger on it, because that often happens as we bring those two teams together. The IT people know what to expect, and a lot of times they let it show in their attitude that, oh, we have to work with these less than people. And I've seen this happen a lot. And as a result, that attitude does get carried over to the client team, and they are much more reticent to speak up and to offer advice. And to, it's kind of like, well, you guys are the smart guys. You must know. I'm not going to get in the way of this. But a good, solid project manager who understands his client will bring his team leads aside, or her team leads aside, will bring the entire team aside and say, look, this is our client. They are as important to this project or more so than we are. Let's make sure that everything you and I have just been talking about, let's make sure that we develop that team charter with them as well. Give them not just permission, but give them incentive to speak up. But it takes a mature project manager and one who's observed these things to make those sorts of things happen.
Yes, 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 yes. It almost redefines the team too, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, because see, from my perspective, the client is never not part of my team.
Right, right. They are the process of user acceptance testing. They are the process of collecting requirements. They are the process of, validation and review and feedback.
Well, I'll tell you, I've even been on projects where, traditional, we talk about predictive agile. My experience is largely with predictive, where, you've gone through these phases and you get to the design phase after you've completed your requirements. The design phase typically says, okay, IT is going to go away and design the system. With the client teams that I've led, I've inserted them within those design issues, because what happens is, as a designer begins to put specifications around those requirements, more questions come up. And to have a client person right there as part of, maybe even co-located, to be able to answer questions and used as a sounding board is hugely important to that whole design process.
This actually strikes a light bulb in my head. Maybe in future conversations, we can actually start introducing agile concepts, because predictive is not something that is opposite of agile. They're sets of skills, and a predictive project can take advantage of agile, just like you said in your example there. And a lot of agile is, how do we work together?
Absolutely. And the reason I would insist on what I just described was because I've been on those projects where you go through, you go away, IT goes away, does a design, develops based on that design, presents it to the user acceptance test team, and they go, I know what I asked for, but I'm not seeing based on what I'm getting. You don't ever want to be in that situation.
Exactly. And this is what they were actually looking at when the early definers of agile were working with. How can we actually insert the voice of the customer and the perceptions and the needs in every part of the work? It's scary, and it's a huge commitment.
So let me turn your question back to you then, in terms of how would you, as an IT leader, get in front of that client who is who's already feeling intimidated, who's already feeling like they can't really contribute? How would you get in front of that?
First of all, like you said, I would have an internal discussion, and I would set expectations that we are of service.
Good.
And we are fulfilling an objective of our user and our client. And if we have an idea, we provide it to our as our clients as options, and they support and engage. So it's clarity in roles and responsibilities. It also sets an expectation of respect and fairness too. What is our job to do? It's not to solve our problem, it's to solve their problem. And it's creating that. The team charter itself can actually work with that. And like you said, as we open up the work and the project expands to embrace participation of the stakeholders. They're a member of the team. And so we're going to actually have them commit to the team charter too. But it may not be evident early on, but the commitment to the charter actually makes work so much easier. So it's a teachable moment, and there's a little bit of risk involved for people who've never worked under this model, but at the same time, it is highly successful, and it provides incredible results when done well.
Well, in the early days, and you and I are old enough to remember the early days when IT was king and the users were there just to kind of sign off on things, where we could kind of advance our theories, and then basically deliver a project and say, there, go. I'll show you how to use it, go and use it. Those days obviously are gone. And one of the things that I've had to do, much like what you're talking about, is have that internal meeting. And the reason that many of my teams were so successful was because we went through the process saying it's not up to the client to understand my IT lingo. It's up to my team to understand their lingo. So not only was I the expert in IT, and I've had teams that ended up knowing the client's rules better than the client did.
That's
they got that deep into
the objective.
Yes.
That's the objective, because if you can do it once, it doesn't matter what environment you can go into, you can do it again and again and again and again. And that's what makes us very powerful.
But it requires that sometimes, especially with people just breaking into IT as project delivery experts, sometimes it takes that meeting and that reminder that it's not up to the client to learn our business, it's up to us to learn the client's business.
Right. We speak their language, we solve their problems. And that is a huge gap. It's funny because if you take it out of context of projects and project management, and you bring it into business and you bring it into culture and society, for thousands of years, this is the natural way we do things. When we go into another country, we don't impress our order or our expectations on the people who are inside and run that country. We listen to them and find out how we can operate within them. It's a much more mature way of learning how to do business well.
That is a great analogy, because people can understand that. I'm not going to go into Ireland and tell them how to do business. I'm going to learn from them and help them do their own business, right? So yeah, it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So in terms of formalizing this, what benefits do you see in terms of formalizing a team chart? Project charter, I understand. That's what kind of creates the initial scope, right? But from a team charter point of view, do you see what are some of the benefits you see in formalizing that?
Let's agree on what it means to make something formal. Okay. You don't just write it down. You don't just document it. You make it very easy for people to understand. Okay. That's basically what it is. Everything is clear and concise, and they can't be confused. Okay. So now with that, you have clear and ready expectations you can review and say, this is what we agreed on. This is what we voted on, and this is what we committed to. It's like pointing up on the wall and saying, has something changed? Now, I'm not going to make people wrong. And this is a rule I learned a long time ago, because if you make people wrong, they close down, they shut up, and they put on heavy armor.
Yep.
So what I've learned is, what happened here? What has changed? It doesn't threaten the individual. It allows them to participate in the problem solving, and they can take partial ownership of the resolution, whether or not their behavior was part of the cause.
Yeah. The other thing is what you just described. If you do that ahead of time at the beginning of the project, it's much easier than trying to retroactively put something in place after mistakes have been made.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, and the problem is you can put broad general statements in early, but when you're doing it, in the spur of the moment, you're doing little tiny quick fixes that fix this solution, but they don't, handle a spectrum of solutions like conflict. We're not going to argue about the technology. Okay, what are we going to argue about? It would have been nice if we would have just talked about argument in general, and then we could apply it to all sorts of things.
Well, and the other thing is not to put out these incremental improvements. It's not to put them out in email forms, because people, I mean, projects, we get inundated by emails, and you miss that email, you miss that particular team agreement if something comes through. So there's always a way to kind of, if you, like you said, if you formalize that document and incrementally improve it along the way, it becomes a document that's incrementally improved, not a series of random emails.
Yeah, you can apply version control on it and say, okay, these are the changes we're making to our charter over time. We found this happening. We agree this is important for the whole team to come together.
So is there more to these team charters than just being able to work well together, do you think?
More than, that's a hard thing to answer. Okay, so let's talk about norms, okay? Culture is the informal rules and behavior that define a group. Okay, that's basically what it is. And we have culture. Every group has its culture.
Right.
It's going to develop or not. Okay. Now, norms are the normal behavior that supports that culture. So I would say that is a huge endeavor. And if you get just that in place, that's great, because the problem is it's not just, answering emails, within 4 hours of receiving it. It's like, we're going to respect each other. We're going to be fair. We're going to all aspire to look for the truth, right? It's like, wow, this is not just, not just we're meeting the objective of the project, we're meeting the objective of why we came together as a group.
Well, and if I extrapolate from that too, if I'm part of an organization building these teams and having these team charters, one of my goals has always been, even though I never formalized these things, which I should have, but one of my rules has always been to improve this such that the organization itself continues to improve it. We can take these ground rules, tweak them, and apply them to the next project. And then here's my mark of a successful team charter that's worked well, is that we finish that project, we leave it, we're successful, and we say, you game? Are you game? Let's do this again on another project as a team. If you want to work together again as a team, that's success.
This is interesting, okay? Because one of the changes in the material for training people for the PMP exam is what you're just talking about. Lessons learned historically have been captured in what they call a lessons learned register.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Now, the material since January 1st has started talking about a lessons learned repository. It's the responsibility to share lessons learned within the project to support its success, and then put it in a repository to support other project success and also support the success of the organization. And it explicitly states that, just that. So you're spot on with the wisdom of how we're looking at incremental improvement and maintaining and growing health.
I didn't realize that was becoming part of the PMI culture, because I should direct you to one of the blogs that I wrote last year exactly on this process where lessons learned become part of the organizational culture.
When we're going to see the PMBOK 7th edition, August 1, and we might want to think, soon after that, to have a conversation that actually connects what you've written about compared to the direction that PMI sees project management going. And I think you're going to be very pleased and surprised.
I think that would be a lot of fun. When we talked about lessons learned, I remember very specifically going from, and this happened to be two very large projects within the same not within the same jurisdiction, but within the same kind of grouping of functionality. Mm-hmm. And I was able to work with my one client team and its IT provider, develop a beautiful lessons learned document because there were many lessons learned, bring that document to the next project, which was very similar to the previous one, and immediately get a huge head start. That wasn't even within the same organization. That was transferred from one organization to another. So yeah, I think we can do those team cultures or team charter aspects and make them ubiquitous across many of our projects.
We actually did that in consulting, and it was hard. It was hard because our consultants were 80% utilized. And no sooner were they off a project when they were starting to prepare for the next project. And so how are you going to collect that? So we figured out about 15 project managers got together and we figured out, okay, kickoff meeting. We're going to have a lessons learned slide and we're going to have 5 empty bullets and we're going to have one bullet at the top that said, if you were to work in this city again, what would your favorite restaurant be? And actually, that made it very easy for people to be motivated and want to, number one, actually contribute to things that they don't think, is interesting for the success of a project, but get in the habit of thinking about how to actually find this knowledge and information that could be valuable for other project teams in the organization.
Well, and I think it also works if you don't wait till the end of the project. If you build in some tasks at each, well, in Agile would be within each sprint or each couple of sprints, you kind of build in these lessons learned. Within predictive, you find somewhere in a phase or at the end, certainly at the end of a phase, to collect them. Otherwise, your memory gets very short by the time the project is ended and you forget all of those lessons learned.
You don't see it, but one of my mentors is whispering in my ear right now. And he's saying, Tim, don't forget, ABC, always be closing.
Yep.
The kickoff is the start of the closing of the project, and the team charter is establishing that vision and establishing the group to be ready to close successfully.
Absolutely. One of the other marks of success of team charter, formal or informal, in my own experience, has been the friendships that I've developed over the years. My wife and I were just on vacation in Hawaii, and we got together with people from my project from 30 years ago, 30 years ago, and had a wonderful reconnection time. And we agreed over dinner that if we had to do it again, we as a team would do it again. I think that is team charter, informal success, formal success, however you want to define it. I think that is what teams are all about.
So that begs the question. It's obvious that with some teams, they're very mature and they're what we would call self-organizing. The participants are very responsible, they're ready to step up, and they're ready to take on accountability, right? If they're really self-organizing, what's the purpose of the charter?
Well, I'm just pulling something out of the air now because self-organizing to me is more an agile concept, which I'm less familiar with than than other IT concepts. But I think for the way I would look at that is every team needs to have its rules of engagement. Whether you're self-organizing or not, you still need to formalize what you've agreed to as a self-organizing team. Because even a self-organizing team comes up with some conclusions as to how they will support each other and work together.
You know, there's something about that. There's some public, there's something about stepping into the arena or stepping into the boxing ring and saying, I'm publicly committing to this. I'm stepping up in front of these strangers or in front of my friends.
Yeah.
And I'm saying I will adhere to this. There's something so prescient about doing that as a statement. It's something very human.
But let me offer something else kind of along the same lines. And that is that self-organizing teams, or even teams that have worked together on previous projects and came as a team to another project, or mostly as an intact team, end up creating a different team charter than the one they just came from, not because they don't want to work together that way, but because they have a different client, and the client influences how they're going to work together to support that client. I've had those experiences as well.
Oh yeah, and that harkens back to our conversation a few minutes ago that says the client is inescapably a part of the team. They will be, and they're going to shape, and they're going to participate in, and they're going to commit to the culture. You can't have it without it.
Well, and just the example I just used from our recent trip to Hawaii. Now just know what you know about the culture from Hawaii, being very family oriented, very face saving oriented. Take a team that works there, and then take that same team and put them into, I'm not going to name a state, but let's say a large eastern seaboard state that is very aggressive in its approach normally. That same team would naturally develop a different team charter in terms of how it would work in that situation, I would think.
Yes, they would have to, by necessity.
Yeah.
By necessity.
So what else are we thinking about here in terms of this whole idea of team charter? Do you think the team that you can build a team charter that considers everything that a team could possibly go through? Is there a way to consider everything?
I was thinking about that the other night. You know, I was thinking, could I make an all-inclusive charter? Have you ever had a contract that was all-inclusive?
Well, I've had contracts that thought they were all-inclusive, but no, I've never had one that was.
See, and that's the closest I can get to comparing to what my perception of a charter is. It's an agreement, and it, you know, if it's going to be big and broad, it's going to miss the details. And if it's going to be detail oriented, it's going to miss these big, broad statements. And so, like you said, you know, if you get early into it, you can establish the framework. And then as you progress, you can make incremental changes. And those incremental changes can be applied to future projects. Now, from time to time throughout the project, as you increase the team charter, you may need to prune it, and you may need to clean it out. And I've done that a few times. Is this valuable for us anymore? We're not working with that part of the project, or we're not working with that part of the client. Does this make sense for us to have daily stand-ups every single day? And the team says, well, yeah, Tim, I couldn't see us doing that, client or not. It's valuable. And I go, okay, you're committing to that. I'm happy.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense that that if you think about this, as you go from project to project, there's a lot of things that are very similar or very much the same. So if you develop that kind of skeleton of kind of a pegboard of things that you want to include in your charter, then you always have those major items that you can build for this team. So for example, communication is a hugely broad topic, but you can develop an aspect of communication for this team that was different than the last team because of the nature of the work that you're about to go into.
Right. And you can actually have a charter that says, while we're working in isolation, this is how we're going to work. And when we're client facing, this is how we're going to work. And I've done that before too, and that has been incredibly successful.
I wonder how many team charters got upset a little bit when the pandemic broke out and people had to suddenly work remotely.
Oh boy, how are we going to communicate, and how are we going to respect each other, and how are we going to recognize everybody's participation, and how are we going to vote? Yeah, it's really difficult. Here's the problem, okay? The team charter talks about the group, and it talks about the culture, and it talks about values, which means ethics. And generally, ethics and culture are under the ownership of the executive. Now, from a standpoint of the project, we can consider ourselves as executives, but in the context of the bigger business, we may or may not have that flexibility. And so what we have to do is be mindful of our scale and our context within our little bubble.
Yeah, and the other part, what you just talked about too, is have the team do it together. So yes, you may have executives imposing their views, but imagine if you didn't have team contribution. Then it's the personality and the style of the project manager or the team lead or the executive above the project manager that forces that culture upon the team because of something that they knew from another project. And as a result of that, the team never does begin to click properly. And that's where I think the team charter becomes really important as a ground up development as opposed to a executive pushing down their thought process and their edicts on the team.
Perceptions and opinions. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we can actually facilitate that discussion and balance those two drives, because again, we're not going to get away from that. That's the role of the executive, and that's the role of the team. It's the team that innovates. It's the executive that actually states, and we're the intercession that finds that fine pressure where the diamonds are made.
I was brought in on a project one time to help try to understand why it had gone off the rails. And one of the things that myself and the other person doing the assessment found was the original project manager on the project imposed his autocratic rule on the team. He was very autocratic. This is how we're going to do things. No team charter, no, this is how we're going to do things. When he was replaced, the person that came in behind him was a woman who, as best I can describe, soon succumbed to Stockholm syndrome. And she became the client's biggest advocate and created different problems for the team. So you can imagine this team vibrating somewhere between the autocratic and the Stockholm syndrome and trying to push on and make a success out of that project.
Yeah, I would, if I was a team member in that side, I would expect myself never feeling I was ever going to do anything right.
Exactly. And some of the people actually said, this is not good for my career, and they left. And it, things just got worse and worse. And we finally had to work with the client to right that ship by bringing in still another project manager and developing some of those rules of engagement that hadn't been done properly up front.
That's a powerful statement on the value of the team charter and why we have to have the team participating and voting on it.
That's why I love our discussions, Tim, because I never even thought of that experience until just now, when something you said triggered that reminder in my experience. So that's always good to have these discussions, because they are truly from the heart, from the experience, and whoever's listening to us. I think today we've offered a lot of practical advice for a new project manager, or for someone who is well ensconced in their career. I think there are things that they could pick up from our discussion today that they can go back to their office and immediately implement. What do you think?
Yes, yes. Whether it's putting a slide in the kickoff and say, this is how we're going to collect lessons learned, or it's sitting down and formally or informally saying, here's how we're going to argue. It's not my idea. This is what I know works. Can you guys commit to this, or do you have a better idea? Yeah, and there's a lot of actionable work we can do from this.
Well, I think we are now at the top of the hour. Where can we find you during the week when you and I are not having these wonderful discussions, Tim?
I am in LinkedIn. That's the best way to catch me right now. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, you'll see me over at Twitter and in Instagram. But at the same point, I will see you if you find me out there. But for right now, look for me and talk to me over at LinkedIn, and I'm happy to say hi.
And for me, I offer my services through my excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I offer my services through my website called peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com. My blog I found is interesting because it made me think through many of the discussions that we're having. And so I'm hearkening back to even a year ago to bring some of these up.
Oh,
but I'm
great.
also on LinkedIn, and it's just a great place to be in terms of being able to connect with fellow IT project practitioners.
Cool. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you guys for finding us out, finding the links that we're sending out, and we'll be here every Friday at noon Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll be happy to talk with you.
Great. Until next time, we'll see you.
Thanks, and thanks everyone.